Hey there guys, and welcome back. Now today we're going to be starting a brand new project, and if you can tell, it is Mephiston. I've got his main body here in a sub-assembly, so he's not got his head, his backpack, his sword arm on, and he's not on his base. Now, as you can see, I've done a little bit of fixing up with mold lines and gaps. It's just basic milliput work. But today we're going to be building his base. Now, with a lot of the characters that come out these days with Warhammer, they have a little bit of scenery or rubble or something they're standing on or attached to that can make for quite a nice base. And one thing I like to do is, because I'm going to do this on a plinth, on a display base, is I like to incorporate the original base it comes with in the display base, basically, because it gives me, for example, with this guy, it's quite awkward. He's got a little foot attached to the base rather than to his cloak. So I can just keep that original part there and just stick him on, and I don't need to awkwardly pin or move things in order to get him to fit, basically. If I stick this on and incorporate this with the rest of the base, I know it'll fit. So I've got a few things here that you may be interested in. I've got these little bits, which I'll explain in a minute, but they are made with milliput. Now, a lot of what I do for base making is I use a lot of milliput. It is a 2-part epoxy putty. It's really useful for this kind of stuff, really cheap, inexpensive, and easy to use. Just use it with water, knead it together till it's a uniform color, and then work away. Now, I haven't shown you me working with it because that is honestly pretty boring, and the stuff I did is simple. So what I did was I rolled out some sheets. I just rolled them flat, let it dry. I made sure I rolled them out on a bit of plastic card, a bit of blister plastic, so that when they dried, I could just peel them off. So there was no problem there. And then here I've just cut the excess off what we've got here to use for basing stuff. Now this is a little bit more complicated. I started off with this shape, as you can see, but I've started cutting into it to emulate the shapes of the sarcophagus here, because I'm gonna try recreate this. Now I've left this bit empty, so I'll show you how I handled that in a minute. What else have we got? I've got a little bit of blister plastic here, and I like to build my bases separate to the plinths they're going to go on, just because mostly with these plinths, just because I really like the finish on them, and I don't want to sand it up and paint it and have to deal with all of that. So what I like to do is, usually if I'm sculpting, I'll sculpt on top of this so I know the area that I need to sculpt in, and then I can just take it off, wait for it to dry, peel it off, nice and easy. I've got an example over here of something I've done. So as you can see, I've just sculpted it onto a piece of plastic card, and that means it's flat to the surface of any base I stick it onto, and I can paint it separately without ruining the plinth. Now I've got a few other tools. I'll be using X-Acto blades and drill bits. Got a sculpting tool if I need to do more milliput work. Super glue. I've got milliput dust, which I like to keep some of just because it's nice to repair little holes and gaps, and it can be sanded to the same finish as milliput, and it'll basically keep the same finish once that's sanded. And I've got this here, which is just a sharp metal. It's a bit of a blade, a saw blade, but I like it because this is a flat metal edge. So when I'm cutting with this, I can cut or score a flat line, a straight line quite easily. Now, for this base, trying to incorporate it was a bit of a complicated affair. So I started off just thinking of the basic building blocks of the sarcophagus, but I wanted to make sure this line here was parallel to the base we stuck it on, if you see what I mean. So that line had to be parallel to make sure that Mephiston sat in the same pose, in the same lean. He wasn't like too far back or too far forward. It looked right. So I just did a little test piece here, and I cut this little square of milliput out, and I made sure it all aligned nice and easy. And as you can see, it matches the angle of the sarcophagus down here, and it sits parallel with the base of the plinth and the actual base Mephiston sits on. So I'll use this sort of technique to build up the sarcophagus, and then from there I'll work around and start building things up around it, and we'll see how that looks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build out the second wall, show you my process for doing that, and then I'll show you how I handled this bit of cutting out here. Right, let's move on. So I've got a nice flat bit of milliput. It's kind of the same thickness. It's not really important as long as it's workable. That's the main part. Now I've already measured and cut this all by eye. I didn't use any rulers or anything. I just made sure the angles aligned, and that was it. So we want to make sure we are flat to the bottom of this. Press it on. Now I've got a marker here. Doesn't matter if you get any marker on the milliput. At the end of the day, this is all going to be primed and painted later on, and it doesn't have any effect. So I'm just going to draw the silhouette. The main important part is this line here, and making sure this line at the bottom is flat against. And we should have a perfect cutout. Now, so, like I said before, it's this line, and this line, as well as the flat base, that the important part. This bit here, as you can see, I've just sort of made it as a crumbled bit extra. So what I'm going to do is just put some dots around there to show that bit doesn't matter. Now, next up, we're going to score some lines. And so what I want to do is make sure our sharp metal saw blade here, and now you could use a metal ruler, that probably would be a better suited tool for it. What I'm going to do is make sure that perfectly lines up, then run the X-Acto blade along the edge. I've got a scored line there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this for that line, and this line, and then I'm going to follow the scored lines, cut that out, and we will move on to starting to form the major shapes of the base. I've cut out this piece here to match this, and it lines up really nicely, and it's going to go here. So you can see it's a great fit, great match. Now, what we just need to do is glue these bits on. So I've got some super glue here, I've got some milliput dust ready. The thing I like to use with this is if there's any excess super glue on the edges, I like to just add a bit of that on there because it'll soak it up really nicely and help sort of reinforce the bond almost. So I'm going to take our first bit here, just put some super glue on. Hold that there for a second. Line it up, make sure everything is squared off. Now what I'm going to do on the inside, just to make sure it's strong enough, I'm going to sprinkle some of that milliput dust. And a dab of glue I've put there. This isn't massively important, but it's just a little something. Mostly just to keep my mind at ease. And there we go. Just as long as I don't obscure any detail on the outside, we are all good. Now, time to get the next little bit. So same again, line it up, hold it for a couple of seconds. be reasonably nice. There we go. Reasonably nice sarcophagus built. I'm going to do the same again with the milliput dust over here. Just because the connection's a little bit thinner on this bit. But overall, it's looking pretty good. As you can see, it's sort of skewed. It's not quite dead on. I will have to gently sand this bit across, but for the most part, we've got a base that our Mephiston can stand on. And there we go. Something for us to build around. Right, so what I'm going to do is sand off these bits here. I'm probably going to break off a little bit of this and get a jagged sort of rubbled edge like there. And then we'll move on to showing you how I've approached making the lid, and I'll do an example here. And we'll see how it looks and how we're going to move forward then. So this next bit is how I created the sarcophagus lid. Now, so what I did was I made sure I had a piece. What I did was I just sort of eyeballed the distance here because this is a flat surface. There's no bend like in the rest of the parts. And I cut a piece of milliput, again, rolled it flat, then cut it to size that ways. And for the design for the bottom, I didn't want to do as complicated a design as this because that would be honestly a nightmare and I didn't want to put myself through that. So I just took this shape here, this sort of curved point, and recreated it, but a bit more dramatic at the bottom. So it still reads as part of the same piece. Now, as you can see, I've broken off the ends here to look like rubble, like so, and we'll do a bit of work to get this closer and have little cables coming out later on. But for the moment, I want to talk about the design here. So as you can see, if you look head on, it's got a sort of step design. So it goes halfway down, steps out, halfway from that, steps out, and then it's the lip. Now there is an underside to it. I'm not that worried about doing that because what I can do is just sort of camouflage that. And it's a little detail, so it wouldn't be that obvious. So as you can see, I've just added a little support beam here between these two so they don't pull apart or push together and collapse. But for the sarcophagus, I'll show you what I did. So first things first, I scored a line that's roughly the distance out from the first step to the edge. So what I do is I just score that. I score it deeper and deeper. And I'm using the blade here with just my fingers. I've not got a holder for it just because I find I've got a lot more control over the pressure I apply. I'm not going for large amounts of pressure. I'm being very careful here because I don't want to cut all the way down. I only want to cut roughly halfway so that I don't snap off this edge basically. So I'll just cut through the score a little bit more. It's not the end of the world if you do a little bit of damage. These things are fixable. And then what I'd do was I'd make a rough score along the edge. As you can see, there's a little line there where I've already done that. But because I've got this little bit here done, what I can do is follow that edge. Make sure to keep it parallel with the surface of the sarcophagus lid. So what I want to make sure is that this all runs along at the same level. So I've made that little mark. Just using the length of the blade from that little mark, what I can do is basically fold it down and extend it. Just using the length of the blade to keep the line straight. Just push it along. And I've got my score mark for the first step. So you can do this in sections. AKA you can cut a little line here and push in the score mark. So what I'm going to do is just gently do that. And because this is layers, milliput is essentially just layers. What I'm going to do is just at each point, really controlled presses into the edge and take the edge of my blade along the line we made before and just push in ever so slightly. You don't want to go all out on the first try. You just want to work increments slowly but surely, just because this is quite a careful little piece we're doing here. There you go. Those have just come off nicely. And that is not bad. Now what I've got here is a square edge file, metal, just so it doesn't wobble and warp. And what I'm going to do is gently run that over a couple of times, just pressing against the edge and against the flat bit. Just so it is in keeping with the rest. Now we've got that first bit of lip done. As you can see, there's still quite a bit of texture, rough texture here from the inside, sort of sculpted and pressed together part of the milliput. That's not that massively important. If anything, it'll add to the texture of the sarcophagus later on. Now, the next part is this next little step. So what I want to do is almost gauge the distance I've got between these two bits here and here. And same as before, just want to make a nice little score mark and have that run parallel to the edge we've already got. Carefully as always, making sure we've got roughly the shape we want. We don't need it exact, we can always just come in later on with the file and just gently sand down. As you can see, a bit of a thin layer of the old milliput came off there. Not massively important. So I just want to go ahead and make this score mark a little bit deeper. Again, using the length of the blade to keep that line nice and straight. If we lose some bits like that, not the end of the world. We'll just put it down to the sarcophagus being all battered. Now, much like before, but even more careful this time, we want to take our blade, making sure the flat of the edge is against the surface, and just curl it over to make a nice straight line. As you can see, I just about pierced already. So this is all about control of pressure on each little bit and just understanding. You need to be careful and just take your time. And so what I'm going to do is move this edge along in the same process as before, using the flat of the cutting blade. And we've gone through there and we've actually cut off most of the part we wanted to take off. It looks very rough at the moment, but that is unsurprising. So be careful of your fingers. Don't want you losing any digits. And there we go. Now we come back to our little file. Just back and forth and back and forth, cleaning up that corner. I'm choosing to use a metal file because it has that corner on it that we want to use to just solidify these shapes so it doesn't look wavy, and it clearly reads that these are like step downs. Now, as you can see, this little edge here goes out a bit further than what the others do in comparison. They don't need to be perfect, but one thing you can do is just sand it down. To get it to your desired distance. And then again, that's basically, I'm going to use a bit of a lower grit. Now, the reason I wasn't sanding the edges with this is because it's a sponge, so it's very soft. So it won't maintain those corners as well as we'd like. And there we go. We've got the steps done. And look at that, that's basically bang on. Now this will be all broken apart, I imagine. And not in full capacity, but I have drawn the beginnings of a little blood angel icon. I was planning to show you how I'd sculpt it on, but I figured that'd be quite a nice freehand detail to add later on in the painting. So, last but not least, we've got this little indent line that goes along the edge. That is as simple as just scoring a line, gradually making it a bit deeper. Again, we're not going for perfect here, we're going for battered and believable. But it is super simple. You just push the end of the blade, cutting side down, along, and it helps just dig out a little trench. Just make sure all the lines are connecting. What you can do, you can even use this little saw, if you've got one, of course. What I like doing is just using it gently as I can, just pulling the teeth across. And that just helps dig out this little trench a little bit more, make it a little bit clearer. And there we go. The lid to our sarcophagus is done. So I've done a few more things with the sarcophagus. What I've done is I've used 2 just flat pieces of the milliput And I've just glued them on and then sanded it down to fit the silhouette of the sarcophagus. So nothing special. Didn't feel like filming it just because of how simple it is. It is literally stick it on, take your file, sand it to the shapes that the base already had. Now, what I'm going to do here is I've got my plinth and I've got my little marker I made. So if I just place Mephiston on there, what I want from Mephiston is him to be placed. Basically, I want it weighted in the center, if you know what I mean, if you get what I mean there. So that's quite a nice line there. So if I just mark this off, there we go. I'll show you what that looks like from a front-on perspective, just because the camera is currently above. So there we go. Now that we have this placed, I've not attached it onto here, I'm just holding it on with my finger. I want to figure out where to place the actual rest of the sarcophagus. I think what I'm going to do is basically have it kind of want to break it off about here. So I can have that bit lying down and then this bit sort of crumpled up as well. So what I'm going to do is mark the back where I've put the little markings there. Mark this bit here. I'm going to draw a higgledy-piggledy break and really scratch that in. Hopefully, when I go to snap it, it will take the path of least resistance and snap across this little line I've made. So, perfect. What I'm going to do is use some tweezers to just break apart the edges there and make it look a little bit more ruined, a little bit rougher. I'm going to do the same here. So what I'm going to do is glue this I'm going to place it where I want it to go, hold it there, glue it to where it connects. And hopefully I can just lift that off and just reinforce some of those areas I've just glued. Now, as you know, as part of the reinforcement process, I use milliput dust. Just sprinkle it in the areas that aren't going to be seen, and that will just help build up a little bit of a reinforcement. I'm doing here is kind of building a bit more. It's hard to show on the camera, but I'm kind of just building a bit more composition. Like I've got this little broken piece. What I could do is to create another line. Let's have it almost sort of resting like that. I think what I'm going to do is just sort of blunt off the end there, just so it's not a sharp point. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another little bit of milliput here. Just going to quickly glue that on, nothing major at the moment. I can come back in a second, and I want to make sure that's not gluing to the plastic. Then what I'm going to do is sort of come back, glue the areas that it's touching. Try and work pretty quickly just because I don't want the glue to stick to the plastic like that, but I do want to get a good connection between these elements. Now I've made this all up on the fly. There's no planning gone into this. I've just broken it apart then, looked at it and thought, that'll do. Now we've got a lot more to add to it, but at the moment these are just the main shapes we're going to be using. And as you've noticed, I'm sure by now, I'm using quite a bit of super glue. Just to make sure it's all connected up. Another point of using the milliput dust is really helps just dry the connection quickly, just because all the super glue gets absorbed into it and it just spreads out and dries out pretty fast. So stick him on there. And there we go, we've got the basic shape of a sarcophagus built. Looking pretty cool. And what I'm going to do now, apart from let that dry, is I'm going to build up some shapes using some of our off-cut bits, bits of broken stuff that we've got. And I'm going to build up some more shapes around and hopefully fast forward that and then show you the result. after a bit of work, I've got the final base now. I've added a little bit of dirt and some skulls. We've got like a girder, a bit of metal supporting, a big cable, some more supporting work, a bit of rebar and some piping cabling, some skulls, just all about the place, just to give it that grounded reality of like a crumbled old building fallen down sort of area. And if I plop him on the plinth there you go. You can see there's some quite nice shapes that intersect with each other. And he stands atop it perfectly. And yeah, this is going to be really, really cool once we start painting on it, which is the next step, painting the base. Should be pretty simple, should be pretty fun. So what I'm going to do is wait for all the glue and everything to dry on these pieces that I've done, clean them up, and prime it and get ready to paint, in which you'll see in the next episode. So thank you for watching. Hopefully I provided some insight into how my head works and how I think these things through. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.